And away we go. Alright then. So, let's see what me, Riss, and Eric have sent in the group chat since the last time I recorded a podcast episode. Now, I can't say it's good, but it's not that bad either. Or at least one of them kind of made me laugh so hard, I kind of sprained my muscles around my abs. I didn't think that would be possible. Anyway, that's the audio I'm going to play for you soon. And the title within that video, which I just sent to the podcast group chat, reads, "Now who the hell did this? Laughing emoji, laughing emoji." So, I'm about to do what I do best.
Remember, someday you will all die. It's gonna happen, maybe right now. I'm still high, and that's okay. Back in the day, I was locking folks up. So get out and go to prison. Do not listen to me, and do not be birds. And let me be clear, the sky is round. The earth is blue. Howard University, you.
And even now, I still get a bit of a chuckle out of it. Now, of course, there's no way that Kamala Harris would ever say any of these things. It'd be a miracle if she did. However, I don't believe she would ever say anything like that. So, that's the joke of it. The video of Kamala Harris is her saying a couple of words of things that she said, but put it in a random order to make it look like she'd said something completely different. And that is what caught me off guard. And that's why I laughed so hard at it. Now, I'm not sure if any of the lads have seen it yet. If they have, they'd be like, "Yeah, there's not much of a difference." Or one of them will like, "Aha," or something. Either way, it's been a while that there's been anything regarding Kamala Harris. And even if people are saying that Kamala Harris is making a hint that she's going to run for the Democratic ticket again for the 2028 US presidential election, well, only time will tell. There are other candidates in the Democratic Party. It's certainly too early to say who is going to run as a Democrat candidate for the upcoming US presidential election. So, I'll just leave it at that, and hopefully that I can listen and watch more funny videos like this. Not to say that they're even close to the truth. The point is, it's the absurdity. It's what's funny. So, next video I've sent to the podcast group chat. Now, there isn't much talking, however, just looking at the video, now this is not the kind of videos that I would laugh at. It's just, why would you do that? It's just, what are you thinking, man? So, although there's not much talking, I will play the audio for you and describe what I just saw. So, visual-wise, it's just a man and his son, I presume, just walking. Now, the son was running across the concrete pathway towards an indoor hallway of a building, and then entering the shot is a completely different guy that is not the father of the son, driving a small vehicle, which is apparently small enough to fit through the width of the opening of the doors entering the building. So the kid runs across the concrete pathway into the building. The guy that's driving the small automobile, something very, very small to fit through the doors, drives mostly straight through the concrete pathway, but making a left turn through the doors of a building, which is the same doorway which the son ran into. The father of the son trying to catch up with the son to ensure that he is not harmed in any way. The father gets cut off by the guy driving the small automobile and fits perfectly through the narrow doorway. The father, talking to the man driving the small automobile, said something along the lines of, "Well, what are you doing, man? Why would you do that?" The man in the small automobile reverses back a bit. Then continues driving along the concrete pathway over a bridge that is built on top of a small river. And that's the video. That's the video I've sent to the lads in the group chat. Now, I'm glad that the child is safe. That's all that matters. I don't get why. I don't understand why that guy driving the small automobile would think about driving or chasing the young child, especially given that the weight of the very small automobile, although lighter than most automobiles, is at least heavy enough to put pressure on the child physically. And that's not good. Certainly not good whatsoever. I don't get it, man. What's going on in this world? Nothing seems to add up anymore. And that is all of the videos, texts, and messages that's been sent into the podcast group chat since the last time I recorded a podcast episode. With that all being said, let's get right into the news. Futu stock is tumbling today. What's happening behind the scenes? Futu Holdings. I don't know what is happening. That's what I want to know. On Friday, the China Securities Regulatory Commission, CSRC, penalized Tiger Brokers, Futu Securities International, and Longbridge Securities for illegally offering domestic investors access to overseas securities trading without regulatory approval. The three companies violated the securities law by promoting trading without mainland regulatory approval, as the CSRC aims to protect the healthy development of the capital market and channel outbound investments through official channels like the Stock Connect. Shares in Tiger parent UP Fintech Holding and in Futu Holdings fell more than 30% in pre-market trade, while US-listed shares of Alibaba and PDD Holdings, an operator of Temu, also fell sharply. Regulators granted the firms a 2-year grace period to wind down illegal activities, allowing customers to sell existing holdings, while a Tiger spokesperson noted the company has always placed compliance as a top priority. The CSRC plans to continue cracking down on illegal stockbroking by overseas institutions to maintain capital market stability, though analyst Stephen Leung of UOB Kay Hian suggests these actions may temporarily cool trading in Hong Kong. So, from my understanding, companies in China are providing trading options with other finance-backed entities that's not been approved by the Chinese government. That's my understanding. Now, I know not a lot of people like what China is doing. I'm not talking about the government, nor is it the point. That's not the point about the government. I know people don't like China for, well, I don't know where to begin with that. Yet there's a lot of things people don't like about China, mainly on the international stage. Nonetheless, I understand why China does not want any of their companies or any institutions within China to be reliant on outside funding or investment. That part I understand, and I don't blame China for that. Although it is important to have some kind of diversity with what kinds of funding is given to Chinese companies. You should not be too reliant on outside funding and or investment. In the event that the outside investment decides to pull out and your primary source of income just vanishes out of thin air. That is possibly why China has such strict regulations about trading with outside entities. The Chinese government does not want any domestic companies to do any business, mainly with foreign companies, without having approval first from the Chinese government. Of course, China, for many years, there's going to be parts in their investments and the market activity where there's going to be some outside investments and collaborations across the globe, not much to the point it outshines or outnumbers the domestic productivity within China. And as for Hong Kong, not saying that Hong Kong is the best place to be, it is certainly far from being the worst. I'll say that. I'd say that. Hong Kong may be a small nation for now. They're still doing pretty well for themselves and using the best of the lands that they have available to the best of their ability. And I do wonder. I'm not going to glaze Hong Kong for its economical impact or society and other market activities. What would happen if the British and the Portuguese didn't come over to China and set up their own miniature Chinese-esque colonies? Where would China be? Would China be the economical powerhouse today, or would it fall short to what it is now if Macau or Hong Kong wasn't set up by the Portuguese and the British respectively? Or maybe there's another factor where China knew exactly what they're getting themselves into and tried to utilize whatever resources they have, maybe mix a bit of communism and maybe capitalistic marketing strategies to ensure that anything and everything is all produced not just within the country of China, but also that there is little reliance from outside investments and financial backers that are not from China. That is what I know. And I'm not ruling out any other perspectives that people might share at any point. I'm all for that. So, to end off the story about the tumbling of Futu stocks and other companies in China, not that anyone should give China any kind of praise. I do understand why China does not want any of the companies in the country to be too reliant on outside investments and financial backers. Because what if the such decide to pull out last minute? And if it is the primary source of income for these companies, how long will those companies last for until eventually the Chinese government comes in and bail them out? They got to be sustainable somehow. I know Risk, if he was on here, he's got to have lots of arguments against China from the back of his hand, from the freaking sun. That's Risk for you. He's quite anti-China. Not that I have a problem with China. Even if I do have concerns with China, it won't be as negative than what Risk would provide on his perspective on the nation. So yeah, I don't I again. So yeah, that's pretty much that's my take on the story, and yeah, that's about that. Cheaper train subscription should take effect from June 21st. Interesting. The train pass that allows people to travel more cheaply this summer is set to be valid from June 21st to September 1st. That is shorter than 3 months stated in the original plan. With the subscription, people can travel unlimitedly by train during off-peak hours and weekends for €49 per month. This concerns the Flex del Frei subscription, which normally costs almost €128 per month at NS. The climate ticket was a major wish of GroenLinks PvdA. The party hopes that more people will take the train instead of the car. Also, given the high fuel prices, it should become more affordable for people to go away for a day this summer. The cabinet wants to spend a maximum of 118 million euros on the subscription. This also means that there is a maximum number of people who can use it, according to the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. It is difficult to estimate whether this will actually happen. The money is being taken from the Mobility Fund, as savings are being made on research into storage of radioactive waste. A portion almost comes from the Climate and Energy Fund. Traveling by public transport is good for combating emissions, said Minister van Veldhoven. There was already money in the climate fund for measures regarding trains and clean cars. So that is why it fits with this application as well. The Senate and the House of Representatives still have to approve the plan. State Secretary Bertram asks them to do so urgently because otherwise the June 21st deadline cannot be met. The Cabinet is also working on developing a cheaper long-term public transport subscription. The result of this climate ticket is being incorporated into this as well. Okay, so there's a train subscription that is valid from end of June till the start of September, and there's already something from the Climate Fund that will go towards. Oh my gosh, I have to read this all over again. So, in short, this is to incentivize people to use public transit as opposed to using cars. You know what? I can't argue with that. That's not to say that people shouldn't be using cars, especially if there is an absolute necessity to use the car, such as taking multiple people to places that public transportation cannot take you. You're dealing with heavy cargo which you cannot carry about into public transportation networks or modals. Or maybe there's another reason that actually I don't know what other reasons people might have to use the car. Those are just the main reasons that I can think of from the top of my head. So, will this climate ticket be as effective as people hope it would be? Maybe, maybe. It's not a no. It's certainly not a yes either. What matters most comes down to one thing and one thing only. I do not know what that thing is yet, but eventually I will think of it. Maybe not now, maybe not next week, next month, maybe not even next year. Yet somehow there will be one thing that's missing to incentivizing people to use public transportation. Only time will tell what happens next with transportation in the Netherlands. Milei cut Argentina wheat tax, pledges soy cuts if re-elected. The Rio Times, the Latin American financial news outlet, reports that Argentine President Javier Milei used the 172nd anniversary of the Buenos Aires cereal exchange on Thursday evening to unveil the most consequential cut to Argentina export duties since the temporary suspension of farm levies in September 2025. The wheat and barley duty drops from 7.5% to 5.5%, starting in June 2026. A structural reduction announced as permanent rather than as the temporary holiday that ended last year. The soy schedule begins in January 2027 and reduces the duty by between 0.25 and 0.5 percentage points each month, depending on tax revenue, continuing through 2028 if the ruling coalition retains the presidency. The industrial side of the package is just as aggressive. From July 2026 through June 2027, the automotive sector, the petrochemicals industry, and the machinery sector will pay zero export duties, a 12-month a 12-month window designed to coincide with the legislative campaign cycle and the run-up to the October 2027 presidential vote. Economy Minister Luis Scaburo, Interior Minister Diego Santinier, Foreign Minister Pablo Guierno, and General Secretary Katrina Milei attended the announcement at the Buenos Aires Cereal Exchange, signaling the political weight the government places on the package. Whilst I have said about supporting the farmers and ensuring that the agricultural sector does very well for the Argentine economy, like it should for every national economy across the globe, I don't have much to say on this story. Now, even if Milei has done a lot of changes and made quite the difference in Argentina ever since he was elected, don't think that Milei could win the re-election. You never know if there's going to be an outsider of a completely anonymously unknown party that could make a shake-up in the upcoming for the upcoming presidential election in Argentina. For now, Milei is in the safe. I don't think Milei has to worry too much about losing his presidential seat to someone else. Just know that there's going to be strong opposition and competition for the presidency for 2027, the presidential election in Argentina. So yeah, let's see what happens next with Argentina up until the next presidential vote in 2027. UK scientists developing new Ebola vaccine that could be ready in months. The world is once again confronting the terrifying spectre of Ebola, but this time the enemy is a lesser known and poorly understood strain for which no approved vaccine exists. As the Bundibugyo virus spreads across parts of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda, global health agencies are scrambling to accelerate vaccine development before the outbreak spirals further out of control. Also joining this urgent effort is India's Serum Institute of India, SII, the world's largest vaccine manufacturer, which is now positioning itself as a critical player in the race to produce doses of a promising experimental vaccine based on the ChAdOx platform developed with the University of Oxford, United Kingdom. The outbreak has already triggered alarm bells across international health networks. According to the latest figures released by the DRC and Uganda Ministries of Health, there have been 575 suspected cases, 51 confirmed infections, and 148 suspected deaths linked to the Bundibugyo strain of Ebola. The spread into Kampala has heightened fears of cross-border transmission in densely populated urban areas. The World Health Organization has declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern, while the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has labeled it a public health emergency of continental security. Yet, despite the escalating crisis, there is still no licensed vaccine or therapeutic specifically designed for the Bundibugyo species of Ebola. that gap in global preparedness is now driving an unprecedented push involving governments, vaccine alliances, research institutions, and pharmaceutical manufacturers. World Health Organization advisor Dr. Vasi Mothi recently warned that it could take up to 9 months before a vaccine against this particular Ebola species is ready for deployment. 2 experimental vaccine candidates are currently under consideration, but neither has entered clinical trials. Alright then. So Ebola is spiraling out of control, and health experts are worrying that the spread could be worse than originally expected. Now, I'd assume that there's going to be something ready to ensure that we combat this virus. Then again, it is worth noting that even when, given the serious concern and scale of Ebola, as dangerous as it is important that we ask health experts questions regarding to the severity, what side effects will come from the vaccine if it's once it's made, what should we do to ensure that the spread of Ebola doesn't go further than its current scope at the moment, and also how do we respond to information about Ebola from people online. And we got to be careful, and it's important that we're cautious about how we listen to stories regarding to Ebola, given the stories about the hantavirus. That's not to say that one virus is more dangerous than the other, and you just disregard the virus as not so dangerous because not many people have lost their lives. There are various factors into different viruses to how they spread, who gets infected, and how long it takes for people to notice they were even affected to begin with, mainly without any technology that allows for early detection. And also how many people, as a percentage of those that are affected, have lost their lives to said virus. You can never be too careful. You can never be too cautious. And you can never ask too many questions about anything that goes on in today's world. It is better to ask questions than to ask none at all. It's important to be aware about what goes on in today's world and how you could be affected if you ever get caught in the crossfire. Erdogan signs decree closing Billi University amid criminal probe. On Friday, President Tayyip Erdogan signed a decree closing Istanbul Billi University, effectively revoking the operational license for one of Turkey's oldest private institutions. The closure follows the statute seizures of the university last year during a criminal investigation into its owner, Khan Holding. Investigators previously alleged that Khan Holding principals engaged in money laundering and tax evasion, prompting the state to seize 121 companies last year. Authorities cited a law allowing closure if the expected level of education and training is insufficient as grounds for the decree. Turkey's Council of Higher Education promised to take the necessary measures to ensure the more than 20,000 students suffer no harm during the transition. Under regulations, students are automatically transferred to Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University, designated as the guarantor state institution. An institution built with 30 years of effort was effectively shut down overnight, Yaman Akdeniz, a Bile professor of law, wrote on social media. He criticized the closure as lawlessness, arguing university closures must occur through law, not executive decree. Critics argue the Savings Deposit Insurance Fund, which controls more than 1,000 companies, has become an instrument of political pressure against independent businesses. Officials have not confirmed how students will complete their academic year or sit end-of-year exams in June. Yeah, that's a lot to talk about. there's so many factors in this that, well, there's a lot of factors in everything these days. I will say, even when jobs nowadays may not may not even require a university degree to get the jobs that you want. Except for tertiary services like being a doctor, a lawyer, and so on. Yeah, you may need to go to university and more for that. Most jobs, you can just finish high school and just go on about whatever profession you want to get yourself into. As for the closure of Istanbul Bila University, I'm wondering, could this have happened anywhere else in Turkey? Or is it only in Istanbul where there are cases of corruption taking place in some kind of institutions? And if there are specific places that are being shut down for corruption charges, mainly in the most metropolitan, urban, built-up areas in Turkey, what does that say about urban development? Or what does that say about the current government of Turkey? I'm not going against Erdogan, nor am I defending him either. It's just a case of how is it particular places in particular parts of the country we're hearing so much stories about corruption and closures of institutions, yet you don't hear often such closures anywhere else in Turkey, in small towns or in rural areas. Well, that's because there isn't much of a demand for big facilities and institutions. Even if there are more institutions in major cities like Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, and other major cities in Turkey, who's not to say that there's a much bigger target for institutions in Istanbul as opposed to other cities in Turkey. Now, I'm not saying that people in Istanbul are the enemies of the Turkish presidents. I know for sure that major cities tend to be less conservative and more liberal slash and or progressive than many other built-up towns or villages and communities in any country. That that that's just the kind of pattern recognition that I acknowledge. This exists anywhere else. The United States, infamously well known for having more Republican voters in the farmlands and Democratic voters are more likely in the urban areas of cities. The same can be said for the UK. There's a lot more progressive and liberal voters within London, and more conservative voters in rural areas, countrysides, whether it be in the south of England, the Midlands, maybe in the north as well, somehow. France, Germany, Spain, Italy. There's a very common pattern. Urban areas, major cities, the voters in said areas of those cities are more likely than not to vote for candidates that are either more liberal or more progressive than other candidates of other parties. In retrospect, voters living in rural areas where there aren't many apartment blocks, there are more farmland, maybe a couple village centres, voters living in such areas more likely to vote for parties that have more conservative values, as opposed to other candidates that are not so conservative. That's what I know. And if you look at results, national or local elections for any country, you can see where a certain party is more likely to win seats in which part of the country. If it's within major cities or if it's in more farmland areas. There is a pattern. and it's very, very common. A lot more common than you think it is. And that is it for the episode.